Let's take an example of using the product rule to find the derivative of a function. Let's say the function is given by this. Function is given by square root of x times it by 2x plus 1. Now we know that the product rule states that if you want to find the derivative, you need to do this. You need to do f prime of x, which will be equal to g prime of x times it by h of x plus h prime of x times it by g of x. So in this function, we have to define what's g of x and what's h of x. So we're going to call this function, we're going to call this g of x, and we will call this h of x. So next step is we write down the function g of x, which is square root of x, and then we find the derivative of that. So derivative of this is, first thing we do, we write this as x to the powers of 1/2 because they're equivalent, and then we find the derivative of this by using the power rule, which is 1/2 x to the powers of 1/2 minus 1. If I simplify this, g prime of x will be 1/2 x to the powers of negative 1/2. 1.5 take away 1 is negative 1/2. And then simplifying further down, it's going to be 1/2 times it by x to the powers of positive 1/2. And then just multiply it out. Numerator times it by numerator, 1 times it by 1. 2 times it by x to the powers of 1/2 is 2x to the powers of 1/2. That's it. That's the derivative of g prime of x, g of x. Now on this side, we're going to write h of x. H of x is given by this function, 2x plus 1. And we'll have to find the derivative of h of x. So we say h prime of x will be 2 times it by the powers of x, which is 1. So 2 times it by 1 times it by x raised to the powers of 1 minus 1. Again, x has a power of 1 here. So we multiply by that power first, 1, and then we raise x to the powers of 1 minus 1. Plus, the derivative of this is 0. This is a constant function, so derivative of this is 0. So we'll have h prime of x will then be 2 times by 1 is 2, x to the powers of 1 minus 1 is 0. Now we know that x to the powers of 0, or as a matter of fact, anything raised to the powers of 0 is 1. So this is 1. So we have 2 times it by 1, which is positive 2. So this is the derivative of h prime of x. Now we go back to this function, this equation, and we're going to substitute all the term. So we have g prime of x, which is this. This is g prime of x. So we'll write it down here. G prime of x is 1 over 2x to the powers of 1/2 times it by h of x. H of x is this. H of x is 2x plus 1. Plus, next thing we need to find is h prime of x. H prime of x is positive 2. Times it by g of x. G of x is square root of x right here. Square root of x. So this one we can simplify it down. So that's f prime of x. We can simplify it down. And it's going to be, if we multiply it 1 by 2x plus 1, it's going to be 2x plus 1 over 2x to the powers of 1/2 plus 2 times it by square root of x is 2 square root of x. This is the derivative f prime of x of this function.